The Parasha Matot is, the word Matot means the tribes of Israel. It's interesting because it is one of this and Matot, I must say, conclude the book of Bamidbar, and it ends with the whole concept of the entering the land of Israel, including the boundaries of Israel. The Parasha begins with an interesting commandment. God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, chapter 31, Nekom nikmat b'nei Israel meta Midianim. You will avenge the honor of the Jewish people from the Midianites. As you recall, the Midianites were the ones who had created the terrible orgy to bring down the morality of the Jewish people. Bilam understood that if they could not curse the people, he could bring them down morally, and that God hates nothing more than debauchery, sexual immorality, orgies, this kind of violence, which is actual violence against women, against us, against men. That kind of sexual immorality, God hates. So Bilam figured if we can bring the Jewish people to become immoral, then God will really certainly punish them. Until Pinchas came and did what he did and killed one of the princes of Israel, who was consorting with one of the prostitutes of Midian, and stopped the whole shenanigan. Nevertheless, so now God says, you have to go and avenge these people, the honor of Israel. The Midianites represent an evil nation, a nation that is actually want to bring down the honor, the morality of our people. Interestingly enough, God says, after this will be your last act on earth. After this war, you will die, just like Aaron died. So that's chapter 31, verse 2. So you would expect the verse 3, 4, 5 to be a lot of dilatory tactics. Something that Moshe would say something, would do something. So what does he do? Verse 3. Moshe says, immediately everybody is drafting people from every tribe, you're going to go to war. So sad. He could have delayed, he could have said, well, okay, I'll do this next year, next time. No. The very first act after hearing the commandment to go for war against Midian, Moshe Rabbeinu does it immediately. It teaches us a very important point, that when God tells us to do something, we must do it with alacrity. The speed is a very important part of observance of mitzvot. When a person postpones and delays and is lazy, he cannot. An observant Jew has to be dynamic, has to be agile. He has to be not a manana person. He has to be a person who acts immediately. In this case, even when he was told that after the war he was going to die, nevertheless he goes to war right away. So the next thing that I wanted to show you is how the Torah says, after Moshe gives the order to draft people, Vayimasru me'alfei Israel, the people were taken over, taken out, the soldiers to recruit them. The word Vayimasru is very strange. It means they were given over. It's a passive voice. And the question is, why is the Torah use this form of the verb? They were taken. Why doesn't it say they came? People usually like to be in the vanguard of a war. They like to be participant and active. So Rashi points out that the people knew that after this war, Moshe was going to die. Therefore, they did not want to They did not want to volunteer. They have to be drafted by force, by muscle. They were taken over. They were pushed. Otherwise, they would not have come. Rashi points out to tell us how beautiful the people attitude had towards the leaders of Israel, how dear they are to them. That soon, even though at times the leader may clash with the people, because sometimes leaders ask for things which the people don't want to hear, or he reproaches them, or he teaches them to do something that they are reluctant to do. And Moshe Rabbeinu certainly had many encounters, this kind of clashes with the Jewish people. In one occasion he says, one more, and they will stone me to death. How much anger they have towards me. Moshe Rabbeinu says. But nevertheless, when now they heard that the death of Moshe Rabbeinu was going to occur immediately after the war, they did not want to go to war. And they had to be drafted against the war. What a beautiful idea. But let's go a little bit into the concept of the war. Why does Hashem say that Moshe Rabbeinu should do this war against Midianites? The Or HaChaim makes, first of all, the idea of erasing Midian, erasing the memory of this nation who had done so much damage to the Jewish people. And Or HaChaim says the reason Hashem wanted Moshe to do this war was to repair, to correct a defect of Moshe Rabbeinu. What defect? You recall when the orgy was going on, when immorality was rampant, it was Pinchas who came and acted. He asked Moshe, true, but Moshe did not act. And Hashem, in a sense, says that was a mistake. Moshe should have commanded, should have asked, should have intervened, which teaches us an important lesson. That when there are problems in society, troubles in a community, the leader has to speak out. People cannot just be quiet. They cannot remain silent. Because if a leader remains silent when there are problems in the community, they are actually enablers, not just spectators. They're enabling the violence, enabling the immorality. So Hashem, in a sense, was angry with Moshe Rabbeinu that he did not act in that orgy, in that scandal. So Hashem says, I'm giving you another opportunity to correct the deficiency of inaction that you did last time. We gave him a beautiful concept. I want to point out what a beautiful idea that Hashem always gives us opportunities to rectify any wrongdoing we may have done in our lives. We have sometimes a second chance. Sometimes we miss it. But Hashem always gives an opportunity. Whatever we did wrong one day, whatever error we committed, sin we may have done, Hashem gives us an opportunity to correct that sin, to rectify that mistake. Beautiful idea. I want another point in this pasuk. As they're going to go into Midian, the Torah describes that when they went and they said, Vayu al Midian, they will be over Midian. And so Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, Vayu al Midian, go over Midian. It's an interesting concept. What does it mean to go over or above Midian? Should say go against Midian. What does it mean al Midian? Al, like el al, means above, on top of. Very strange. When you fight with somebody, you're not on top of them, you're against them. So this idea, the Or HaChaim explores and says something that is very instructive. Normally, when a person, the essence of holiness The main characteristics of doing something right is that it elevates the person who does it, just higher. The main characteristic of impurity, of unholiness, is that it brings us down. Whenever a person does something good, a mitzvah, something is attached to his nature that makes him rise, makes us ascend. We feel when a person does something good, the person feels that he is flying, that he is standing erect. But a person does the opposite. The person does something wrong, a sin, lie, violence, stealing. The person feels down. Because the person, that's what immorality does. It brings us down, further down, like in the earth. And so what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying here is, when you go in the war against Midian, you have to do it for the purposes of sanctifying God's name, or sanctifying the Jewish people's name that was erased, that was brought down by the immorality that the Midianites created. So that's what it says. You and Midian, you have to do it with a higher purpose, a higher level. You cannot just do it as somebody down, somebody selfish, or somebody who does. The Torah brings out that when they come from the war, they bring objects and utensils. And it's interesting, the reason I point this out is that the utensils were taken from Midian, from non-Jews who used it from food that was not kosher. So here, Elazar tells us how to purify this vessel so they can be reused. So here we learn the concept, two concepts. One is the concept of koshering utensils. A koshering utensil means, galat kelim, means that when a pot or a utensil accepts some food that is not kosher, or mixing of meat and milk in the same pot, in that case, the pot cannot be used until you remove those particles of prohibition from the walls of the pot. That's called agalat kelim. So here in the Torah it says that anything that goes through water has to be kosher through water. Anything that comes to the fire has to be kosher by the fire. This is the basic way in which we kosher utensils. If you get a utensil from a non-Jew, or you yourself use it for something incorrectly, the way to purify the utensil, it depends. If it was used with hot water, then you have to boil hot water or put it into boiled water. And if it was in a dry heat, like a broiler and so on, then you have to put it in an oven or on fire until it gets right hot. It becomes so hot that if you put a little straw or a piece of paper, it will singe. So these are the two methods by which we actually kosher utensils today. This comes from this parsha. Elazar says clearly, everything that comes through the water, so we pass through the water. And anything that goes to the fire, you go through the fire. And then you would put it in a mikvah, like meinidah. And here we come to the second concept. Any utensil that was owned by a non-Jew, or a utensil that was made by a non-Jew, even if it's new, before using it, first, if it was used with something forbidden, you have to kosher it, and afterwards, or even if it was never used with something non-kosher, has to go to the mikvah. Utensils, especially of metal and glass, have to go to the mikvah before being used. It's called the mikvah of kelim. These laws are actually learned from our parsha. I want to point out another interesting story in our parsha. And that's a story of the sons of Reuben and Gad. Reuben and Gad were two very large tribes. When the Jewish people just conquered the area east of the Jordan, what we call the Transjordan, and before they entered the land of Israel, which is the actual land of Israel proper, these two tribes are happy to be in the Transjordan. And they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, you know what? Why don't you give us this area? We want to stay here to build farms and places for our animals, and we build homes. Give us this place. Moshe Rabbeinu gets a little bit angry. He says, what? We need to go and conquer the land on the other side of the Jordan. You want to stay here? You don't want to participate with the war to help? Everybody helped you conquer this area. You're not going to help them conquer the other side of the Jordan? Terrible. So he said, no. He said, no, we understand. We will leave our families here, our cattle here. But we, the men, those who are going to go to war, we will go with you and we will stay there for years until the land is conquered on the other side of the Jordan. And Moshe Rabbeinu makes them promise that so it will be, that they will go, they will, makes an oath that the land is given to them on the other side of the Jordan only on condition that they will help the other Jews to conquer the land of Israel proper. So it is interesting that in this context, Moshe Rabbeinu, they say, we will build stables for our cattle and cities for our children here. That's the way they express themselves. Moshe Rabbeinu catches the nuance. Says, what, you think first of your animals and then you think of your children. So he tells them what they should do. So then you will build cities for your families, your children, and stables for your animals. And Moshe Rabbeinu, in repeating the words or restating the statement, Moshe Rabbeinu clearly tells them, first comes family, animals, possessions, property comes second. Okay. But it's interesting that when Moshe Rabbeinu tells them the two tribes of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, those are the two who come to say to Moshe Rabbeinu, we want to stay here. When Moshe Rabbeinu gives them the land, assigns to them the land for the family, so that they will then travel across the Jordan with the Jewish people to conquer the rest of the land. But when he gives them the land in the Transjordan, look what it says, verse 33. Vayiten lahem Moshe livnei Gad ולבני ראובן ולחצי שבט מנשה בן יוסף את ממלכת סיחון מלך האמורי ואת ממלכת עוג מלך הבשן. And Moshe Rabbeinu gives to the children of God and the children of Reuven, the two tribes who came to him, and to half of the tribe of Menashe, another tribe. He gives them that land. And all the rabbis ask the question, where does this half of the tribe of Menashe come from? They did not come to us for inheritance of that land. And besides, if they wanted to be part of the land, why didn't they have the whole tribe? What do you mean half of a tribe? What is going on here? Menashe did not ask for it. Moshe Rabbeinu gives them only half of the tribe. Very, very strange. So rabbis explain that Menashe was known to be a people of students of Torah, very spiritual people, scholars, lovers of learning. What Moshe Rabbeinu is doing by giving half of the tribe of Menashe also to go with them, with Reuben and Gad, was a very important preoccupation of the leader. He knew that a community outside of the land of Israel proper, a little removed from the centers, spiritual centers of learning, of prayer, of the Beit HaMikdash that will eventually be built, such a community will eventually be assimilated Eventually they'll be swallowed up by the environment. So he gives them the tribe of Menashe, who are known to be scholars, at least half of it. The other half, of course, goes to Israel, but one half of it to accompany them, to be their teachers, to be their sources of inspiration. And this teaches us the very important function that learning has in maintaining Jewish identity. Learning is not just merely an intellectual work, it's really a spiritual, religious act. When a community does not have people learning and studying, the community dies. I remember in Argentina, there were many communities scattered away from the center of the capital. And some of them were living in areas that were very wealthy, very rich, a lot of resources, a lot of possibilities of building very beautiful communities. But the children, little by little, came to the capital to study, school, so on. These people, these communities eventually totally disappeared. And they were no longer there. Many of the people assimilated, etc. The reason these communities died was that they did not have a yeshiva in them. Whenever there is a yeshiva, whenever there is learning of Torah, community survives. Community continues. And that was Moshe's genius. He said, "You're not going to let you go by yourselves. We're going to send you a group of scholars. We're going to maintain routines of learning every day. They are going to learn even if you don't come to learn. Just the fact that they are learning, they are radiating a kind of inspiration, a kind of light. A learning community is like a radioactive group. Wherever they are, they spread the rays. These are good radiation of inspiration. When you see a group of people learning, that's true. When you go to a place and you know that a lot of people learn Torah, it gives this whole community a great sense of respect and a great sense of stability. And that was why Moshe Rabbeinu adds the half of Rabbi Menashe to the inheritance. Okay, the next parsha,